a nice shout out to Thaddeus over at Screendollars. Thanks, as always, for everything. Mike and I appreciate it.
Thaddeus, you have been doing a fantastic job, and I'm looking forward to seeing you later this week because, Paul, tomorrow I am on a plane. I'm off to Wisconsin to the Lake Geneva Convention, and I'm very proud. Paper Airplane is being honored as the Innovator of the Year for the Lake Geneva Convention.
Wow, that's so cool. Congratulations to the entire Paper Airplane team. I hope
so. The whole team the whole team is coming in. There's not a lot of times we all get together, but we're going to get together for this and celebrate. It was very nice. John Scaletta had approached us and asked us if we would accept the award, and they were just really, I mean, they couldn't have been nicer, and it wasn't anything we were looking for. It was actually an acknowledgement of everything that the team has done over the last couple of years. So that was kind of cool.
And awards are great. Sometimes you feel weird taking an award, like, because we're, generally humble people, and we're like, shucks. But, from a business perspective, to recognize the accomplishments of your company, Paper Airplane Media, is just fantastic.
No, it was,
so congratulations.
It was really cool. And as I've said to anybody, it's a testament to the team. I just try to do my best to not screw it up and let them do what they do best. So, and
just get out of the way, Mike. Just get out of the way.
And while we're talking about awards, we should acknowledge that at the end of October, my co-host Paul Dergabedian is going to be honored with the Al Shapiro Distinguished Service Award at Show East this year. Congratulations, Paul!
And thank you so much. I can't wait. I'm working on my speech. I'll run it by you later, Mike. I'd like to thank the Academy and everyone who helped me on the way up.
Look, the thing about it is, Paul, and in all seriousness, for the last 25 years has been a true spokesman and champion of our business. And when there are, people that want to take shots at what's going on, Paul, and I don't want to, it's not like Paul's sugarcoating any of this. It's, I think Paul's just stating the facts. And, a lot of times, as we go through ups and downs, and we've talked about this numerous times on the podcast, like, let's think about, when we were going through the COVID period and everybody was ready to, talk about how, our industry was dead. Paul was out there in the press, pointing out that this isn't the first time that our industry had faced adversity, and that every time it was written off, it seemed to bounce back. And I would say that was accurate again. So, Paul, it's an award that is very deserving for you.
Well, thank you so much. And I know somebody else who has received this award in the past, so I'm in really good company. We're going to have, once I receive the award, along with you, we can put in our podcast description, hosted by two Al Shapiro Distinguished Service Awards amongst us. So that's pretty good. We could even say award-winning podcast.
It's an award. Well, there you go. At that point, it's an award-winning podcast. But in all seriousness, I mean, it's an award I think that is really justified, and I think I'm very happy that they are acknowledging you this year.
And I'm really thrilled. And Andrew and Robert Sunshine, the Sunshine Group, the entire crew over there is just amazing, and it's an honor. So that's really cool. We have a lot of exciting. You got the Geneva Convention. You have your award coming up. We have the NATO Fall Summit coming up. Show East at the end of the month. The Pioneer Dinner coming up. There's so many things going on within the industry, particularly on the theatrical side of the business. And then, of course, we have to state here that the WGA AMPTP negotiations looks like they're working, and that the strike is, I don't want to say it's over until it's over, but it's tentatively, they've got a resolution.
Well, I think,
right now.
If you want to talk the good and the bad over the weekend, the good news was it looks like there is a resolution to the writer's strike. we'll be moving on then to, resolving hopefully very quickly the actors issue, and, we can get back to business. From a, if there was a bad, it was the lowest grossing weekend of 2023 and the lowest grossing weekend since December 9th of 2022. So
that's right. And I think you pointed out in your commentary over the weekend that it was the first weekend to not even have a single film domestically earn over 10 million since Feb 10 of 23.
That is correct. We've been on quite a streak, and the interesting thing I want to touch on, and I don't want to cast stones because it's that's not what we do here. But, Paul and I had done a panel last week where we were talking to some of the NATO members about tracking. And the interesting thing about tracking is that sometimes it can be misleading. And in the case of this weekend, I think it was one of those cases because coming into the weekend, everybody had pretty much pegged Expendables 4 to be somewhere in the mid-teens. Some even had it higher. And at the end of the day, I think the movie came in right around
8.3
million. So basically about half of where the tracking had it. And, the big question is always, how can those numbers, be so off? There's a lot of different reasons for it, and we discussed a lot of it in the panel. But, the one thing I would say, and I think I kind of pointed out over the weekend, is sometimes that's just the way it works in the movie business. And that, there are times when everybody has expectations and it doesn't quite hit there. So,
and also, Mike, I think, that's a franchise that's been around a long time, obviously. And the genre as differentiated from the horror genre, because let's face it, I mean, Expendables did not have great reviews, although the audience score was pretty high for this movie. I think it was 69%, but the Rotten Tomatoes critics score, remember, this isn't a movie made for critics, but it was in the teens, right? And then The Nun 2, which is number one for the third week in a row, that had, I think, a Rotten Tomatoes score in the 50s. So neither one is well reviewed, but it seems that horror movies, good, bad, or ugly, are immune often to bad reviews. Plus, there's not a lot of competition for The Nun 2 right now. That's all going to change this week, the week after, and the week after that for sure. So it's just one of those lulls. And Mike, as you always say, it's the movie gods or the box office gods. Sometimes this stuff happens. And that's why, and the panel Mike is talking about, we were on for NATO members, talking about projections and tracking. And I said, art or science was the question. I said voodoo, because there's a lot of just unknowns in there. And
it's art and science is what it comes down to. And, there's data to back up, where these projections come from. But at the same time, there's a bit of an art to reading the numbers and to knowing, how they all translate into whatever that box office might be.
Now, I want to ask you something, Mike. Coming from your studio background at Lionsgate, and I don't want to talk about anything specific in terms of Lionsgate. I just want to talk in huge, broad strokes here. So if you have a movie that's on tracking, let's say just any movie in the mid-teens, and you're working with the stars, the producers, and especially high-profile stars who may be producers on that film, what's it like, I wonder, to go back to them, when you come into the weekend and they're probably looking at the tracking and going, well, if we do mid-teens, or even some had Expendables 4 in the high teens, and that sounds pretty good, right? And then when the movie comes in at 8.3 million, what is that conversation like? Or do those folks understand the nuance?
I mean, there's a lot.
Just again,
there's a lot of
terms
understanding of the nuance, and the one thing I would say about when you're projecting out the grosses, and that is, when Thursday night, when that number comes in, you begin to have an idea of where you're going to be. So by the time you get to Friday morning, there aren't a ton of surprises at that point. You're just kind of looking at it. You're trying to find, what is the path where I'm going to go. You want to, when you're messaging, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent on any kind of grosses. And look, I've worked on movies where they've been all over the map. You want to make sure that you are honest with people and that you are accurately reflecting what's going on in the marketplace. Sometimes it's not an easy conversation when you're sitting there in the morning and you're looking at, okay, these numbers are not where we thought we would like them to be, but I have to message to, the producers internally and whoever and set the expectations of where we're going to go for the weekend. So, I would say in my experience, over the course of, 23 years or whatever it was, Paul, they were all over the place as far as that. But you always wanted to be pretty accurate on how you were conveying because to me that was the information.
But this was way off. I mean, the difference between high teens and even mid-teens and under 10 is a big deal. But remember, and we've talked about this, often it's not even the studio ever putting out that.
No.
It's others doing that.
Well, and that's a big issue that happens, and that is there are the box office prognosticators that are out there, and whether they're internally, or talking to the public or whatever they happen to be, they're floating these numbers around, and they're moving the goalpost as far as what the needles happen to be, and it does make it difficult sometimes to manage the expectations of what the filmmakers might be looking at because, as a executive on the studio level, you have a pretty good idea what's going on. Like I said, there's very few times you're going to wake up on a Friday morning and go, wow, I did not see that coming. But when you have outside voices that are talking to filmmakers and saying, well, you look like you're going to be high teens or you're going to be mid-20s and it looks like this is what's going to happen. And, the studio is fighting to keep a lid on wherever that happens to be. That's an issue, and that's an issue. And again, it makes for great headlines for the people who are out there trying to drum up, some businesses. They're putting out some box office projections. And some of the times you don't even know what are they basing that on. Right. What data are they actually coming back on? Do they have ticket sales?
Well, I sometimes wonder, talking about the art and science part, is it an algorithm? Is it some, financial model that is being modeled by somebody, or is it just a guess, or is it just looking at other films in the, let's say, a known franchise and coming up with a number? And that's why generally, Mike, I don't deal in projections and I don't put down anyone who does. It's not really, I may give a range if I'm really pushed, but because even this weekend, I looked at these numbers and you had to kind of correct me. You're like, Paul, I don't think it's coming in that high. And if let's say I was a studio executive and I looked at most of the tracking in those numbers, I might have in some other world or scenario gone to a filmmaker and said, hey, we're probably going to do 14, 15 million. Then it comes in at 8 and you find that out on Friday of the weekend it's opening. That's got to be a tough call. But what else do you have to go on? Or you go on nothing and you don't give out projections, but then people can find them on their own, whether it's the filmmakers or others.
It's really hard to stonewall and say, I'm not going to give out a projection internally because there's enough data, people are looking at it, and you're pressed on a regular basis. What do you think the number is going to be? I don't know. To me, it's a lot of those kind of outside forces, I would say, that end up kind of shaping the narrative a little bit. And the other thing that nobody always knows about these is what's the economics on the movie as well. Because you can sit there and say a movie is, in the press, it's a complete disaster. But if you peel back the economics, it's like, that studio is going to end up making $5 or $6 million on that. It was a nice piece of business for them.
That's profitability versus box office, right? It's two different things often. Or you can have a movie that makes a shit ton of money and is never it can't get a profit earned, but it works both ways.
It really does. I think back to last year in 22 when Lightyear came out. And Lightyear had these lofty expectations that were put on it. And I don't think any of it was put on by Disney. I think it was all put on by external people who are projecting numbers. So then when the movie finally opened up, it was soft. or it didn't hit expectations. Same thing happened this year with Elemental. Elemental had, when it opened, it was perceived as being, a soft, and it didn't do what it was supposed to, and it was very much a disappointment. Fast forward later on, what did Elemental top out at? What?
I'm looking it up right now because I know the global was $479.8 million worldwide against a $29.6 million domestic opening. The opening weekend multiple for that with a $154.4 million domestic, 5.21. Mike, that's for those listening. The multiple, we've talked about this before, is how many times the opening weekend is the ultimate domestic gross earn. 5 times, 5.21. That's huge. Elemental is a hit, Mike.
Well,
it was declared a miss.
I was going to say
in mid-June.
That is part of the world we live in with these expectations on where they are. I mean, you want to just look ahead a couple of weeks, the expectations on the Taylor Swift movie. So, and the expectation and where it actually ends could be varyingly different. As far as I'm concerned, it's a huge success. If it didn't sell another ticket, as of right now, the last thing we heard, which was, a week and a half ago, it had already sold $64 million worth of pre-sales. The movie, again, where does it open? Who knows? Where does it end up? Who knows? But guess what? It's a success. That movie is
already
that movie
Mike,
is a home run at that point.
I have a question for you that listeners may want to know and inquiring minds want to know. So does that pre-sales, obviously, sometimes when you think about that, you think, oh, that's all for the opening weekend, but clearly it's not, right? It's for the whole run. I mean, you could buy tickets for the second weekend or I presume, I don't know how far out you can go.
There's 4 weeks on sale. So you have 4 weekends of tickets on sale. Now, I don't know. I have not, been, no one's given me the inside scoop on how they break down. But my assumption would be, based on the way these movies play, the majority of that would be for the opening weekend.
That's what I was thinking. Well, at first, the reason I brought this whole thing up is even I have been doing this 30 years. I thought to myself, well, 65 million in pre-sales. That guarantees 65 million opening weekend at the minimum. It might be the pre-sales for the opening weekend. Let's just say it's 50.
Yeah.
Or would you think?
I mean, whether it's 50,
it's hard to know.
55, 60, I would imagine based on the, fan base and how rabid they are, that the majority, I would say 90% of the gross is probably targeted toward that opening weekend. So, whatever, but that's where it is right now. We have no idea how that's going to play out over the course of the run. There's no idea of, are there any tricks that, the Swift camp has up their sleeve to refresh the content along the way. We haven't heard any of that. So, where that ends up, who knows? But let's just say, Paul, they open up to 75 million the opening weekend. Say they top out at $150 million. That is a fantastic result. And no one should be looking at it and saying, well, it was only 2 times the multiple. And obviously, it's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Yeah.
Well, this is a perfect tracking movie or an example because people are saying, I've even said 100 million for the opening weekend because it's a fun number and who knows? But I've seen tracking that is very broad from, in the 90s to 150 or whatever for the opening weekend. But this will be a good test because this is a bit of an outlier on every level. It was announced just weeks ago. It's a concert film. It's Taylor Swift. The pricing is kind of unique with Taylor Swift's birthday or something. Lucky number and birthday.
It's her birth year of 1989 and then her favorite number of 1313 for the child's
So
prize.
That'll be a fun one to watch. But I want to shift gears for a second, if I may.
Yes.
And just give a shout out to Barbenheimer. Both of those movies, Barbie and Oppenheimer, have been in the marketplace for 10 weeks. This was their 10th weekend. Barbie remains in the top 5 and Oppenheimer remains in the top 10.
this
entire time. We got to give it up for 10 weeks is a long time in this business.
I have a big one I want to point out on Barbie. And so Barbie was down 16% from the previous weekend. Now, they did get an IMAX infusion because Barbie finally made her IMAX debut this weekend, and that was very successful. But I also want to point out something else that has been a trend that we've talked about before, but again, it backs it up, and that is 2 weeks ago, Barbie went on PVOD. And it was down 30% the first weekend, which was the second best hold in the top 10, 13% this weekend, which was the best hold in the top 10. So, or 16%, sorry, it was 13 on Saturday. But my point being that, as we've been discussing, when a movie goes to premium video on demand, PVOD, where in this case Barbie is available to rent for $24.99, you can own it for $29.99. It has little, if any, effect on the domestic box office.
Theatrical,
I think it's really, really important to point that out because coming out of the pandemic, we talked about all the different release strategies and what everybody tested and how, going to PVOD was going to be, the end of the world for everything. Now, I would say that you need to establish the movie theatrically first. You cannot put them out at the same time on PVOD and theatrically. I think that does not work.
Well, that's a whole different animal.
That's a different animal. And I think when it goes to the streaming platform, whether it's, Max, whether it's Paramount Plus, Peacock, and it's perceived for free at that point with your subscription rate, that kills the theatrical. But of course, on the PVOD side, we're seeing very little erosion on that. And the great news is, we've talked about this over and over again, but it's just another example of where all the distribution platforms not only live together, but help each other.
And that's true. And I think, too, it's price sensitivity at play, because if I can go to a movie theater, get 2 tickets and see Barbie on the big screen for $30, why would I buy it at home for $30? I'll see it again at theater, then buy it at home if I'm a true fan or whatever. So, that's a great point, Mike. And the other couple of movies I want to mention is Dumb Money, which expanded. There's some, it was a slow weekend, but that doesn't mean there weren't some interesting intrigues and stories within the numbers. So Dumb Money added 608 theaters. It's up to 2. I've heard great things about the film. I haven't seen it yet. It's up to 2.8 million domestic, but 2.63 million of that was, 2.5 million of that was earned this weekend. So that's a good thing. And then the other one...
I was going to say, I just want to use that one for an example real quick. So Sony used a similar pattern on Gran Turismo earlier in the summer. And again, these are, as we talked about, when you have a movie that has great playability but might have difficult marketability, you would tend to go into let the movie do the heavy lifting. It's really interesting to look at Gran Turismo. Paul, they've gotten that over $40 million. That was a movie that I think a lot of people would have said it'll be lucky to get over 25. And so hats off to our friends at Sony for being able to pull that together. And then
I agree. And I think Sony has been really, they've been really taking their expertise that maybe we all learned from the specialized side and applying it to some of these bigger, more star-studded movies. But you're right. I mean, Gran Turismo, I think that marketing plan was born out of the inability to have the actors go out and talk about the film. So they found another way to go. I mean, look, all these headwinds or challenges create innovation and a new way of looking at things. And that can be a good thing that comes out of all this.
And then you had another movie you wanted to touch base on.
Oh, I want to talk about Stop Making Sense.
Yeah,
Remastered.
Can you imagine that?
I love that movie. I saw it first run. It's one of the best concert films ever. Jonathan Demme directing, and I just saw an interview with the talking heads, all of them, including David Byrne on CBS Sunday Morning. They had and I don't want to get too much into this, but they were estranged for a while. And, this happens with bands where you have a main or a lead singer songwriter, and then the other band members sometimes feel like they're just the backup musicians for that. And I think of Smashing Pumpkins with Billy Corgan and others, and you often have the Eagles with Glenn Frey and Don Henley. You often have bands where there's like that main person.
Yep.
And then, or perceived as the leader or the face of the band. And, you know, it's interesting to look at where you have bands who look at everything sort of in this democratic way. They tend to have a longevity because they don't have the infighting. Yep. And Don Felder was interviewed recently talking about how if they had just done it that way in the Eagles, they'd probably stayed together a lot longer. But anyway, I digress. But the Talking Heads in their prime, I mean, this was just... I remember seeing this and then bought it. But by the way, Mike, talk about PVOD. PVOD back in my day was you went and bought a video, a VHS or beta tape for $80.
Don't you remember that? 80. There was $99.99 was the list price.
The sell-through. Remember?
Yeah, there was the sell-through price, and it would be, you know, to protect the rental market. You know what's interesting about Stop Making Sense? So it's a beloved, it is the definition of a cult classic. You know, for everyone who talks about, I saw it when I was young, I saw it when I was young. Paul, do you know
That's what I just said.
Do you know what the overall gross was through its initial release?
Let's hear it.
Like $5 million. That was it. It was like
I'm going to look up.
I looked it up over the weekend.
So
the movie went out in IMAX this weekend, did about $1.4 million. So you're talking about basically 25% of what it's grossed in its lifetime. It picked up, you know, for a movie that came out in 1984. So you're talking, you know, what is that? Almost 40 years old.
Yeah. So look at that. This is great. I'm glad you brought this up about the, you know, people going to see it now versus then. And, you know, and often in the rearview mirror of history, we think of things as being an enormous hit, but not necessarily in terms of box office, but in terms of the emotional, cultural impression that the movie. So that movie opened October 19, 1984. It opened, Mike, to an opening weekend gross in 7 theaters, $4,166. Now, by the way, you mentioned correctly so that its final gross was around $5 million for the first run of Stop Making Sense. 4.949 million. That is a 1,188 times multiple of that opening weekend of $4,166. You know, we give you all the numbers here on Ticket to Ride. And it only, at its widest, Mike, widest release of Stop Making Sense, 41 theaters.
Think about that. And it still went out and did almost $5 million. And you've got a movie now that, like, you know, has become, as I said, a cult classic, very beloved. You know, you're 40 years later and it goes out and, you know, $1.4 million, boom, right there.
Well, I can't wait to see it in IMAX because I remember when I saw it in theater years ago, certainly the sound system wasn't probably the best. And I remember my dad was a big hi-fi guy, and he had one of the first people to buy the Beta Hi-Fi, which was where you had a Betamax that you would connect to your big sound system, and my father had this massive stereo, and then you'd watch it through your giant 25-inch TV, which is like the biggest TV at the time. So you'd have this massive sound of Stop Making Sense, and then this teeny tiny visual of David Byrne, like flexible, like moving around like a rubber man and running around the stage, and all the players in the band and the backup singers were fantastic. Go out, if you're younger and you haven't seen it, go see Stop Making Sense, because then it'll all make sense to you why you want to see this. Why you'll want to see this in a theater and certainly in IMAX.
And a couple of other movies I just wanted to point out that have had, again, you know, might have opened in a what was considered a little on the softer side, but have, you know, actually hung in there and done really well. My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3 is at $24 million, 23.8. They've got, you know, when you look at it and on the release schedule, there's 2 weeks to go before Taylor Swift enters the marketplace. No real competition from a
That's a great result
of core audience. So, you know, can they get to 30? Possibly, which would be a great result for that movie.
Absolutely.
Our friends over at Neon released the horror film It Lives Inside. They did 2.6.
Oh yeah, number 7 this weekend.
They had a nice little run on that.
2.6.
So you know, there were a couple of movies out there that, to your point, Paul, while maybe the overall gross was a little less than everybody would have liked, you know, there were some highlights there. And then coming up this weekend, you know, we've got the next chapter in
Saw Patrol.
We have Saw Patrol.
Saw Patrol.
It's a great weekend from a just eclectic group of movies, something for everybody. But Saw's going to work. You know, you know, again, we're going to talk about tracking for a second, but the tracking numbers are all very good. Their unaided awareness is fantastic. And this one, I have heard a little bit of insight that the ticket sales have been backing up the tracking numbers. So
good.
It looks like.
And what about Exorcist, Mike? That's looking good too.
Exorcist the following week. But let's just talk about this week real quick, because you've got you've got 4 movies that look really solid. You have Saw, you have Dumb Money, the expansion of that. You have The Creator from Disney Fox, which I hear the movie is great. And then you have
I hear that too.
You know, Paw Patrol, which the last one quietly went out and surprised a lot of people. And if you remember, the last one went day and date with Paramount Plus. So this one now is a theatrical exclusive. Has not been anything since Elemental, really, for the young ones in the audience. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, you know, Saw Patrol, you know, have a nice little win this weekend.
I like it. And then Swifter Cyst.
Then you have The Exorcist on the 6th, and then of course it's all about Swift on the 13th. But
I'm bummed, Mike, because Friday the 13th was the perfect date for Exorcist.
Yeah, it'll be
because it's Swifty.
They're gonna be just fine. So
the marketer who came up with that date is like, damn it.
Well, there's all that goes with it. Well, but in all seriousness. You know, again, I would say as far as the weekend goes, which came in right around $50 million for the weekend, a bump in the road, my friend.
That's right. And that's what the box office is all about. When I talked to the press over the weekend, they were like, oh, this is terrible. The sky is falling. It's like, it's one weekend.
Yeah, it's one weekend. And again, I'm going to go back to anyone who really starts criticizing on where the grosses are, and they look back on 2019 because everybody likes to do that. You know, I think over the weekend I took a look at it. We're like something like 16 movies off of where we were at the same point in 2019 in the wide release category.
That's a lot.
It's a lot of movies.
That's a lot of movies.
And that means, you know, those are movies that are not out there grossing. Now, you know, we've had this discussion over and over again, and I was talking to an investment analyst a few weeks ago, and the big question was, you know, can we get back to the box office numbers of 2019? And the question is, can we get back to the content levels of 2019?
That's it. That's the question.
If the content levels are there, then yes, we probably can get near the box office.
Well, then, Mike,
levels.
in a way, we have to, and you make a great point, because in a way we have to weight the data. Yep. Because we have fewer films. I mean, if pound for pound the year is going as well as 2019, either based on an average gross
it's actually
of those
a little better.
movies
It's
that
actually
are out
a little
there.
better.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, that's the whole thing. And by the way, getting back to 2019 numbers, we did that for the summer with well, not exactly, but we were in that 4 billion range. So look, this is a work in progress. We have the writer's strike almost resolved. I mean, this is really great news. In the wake of a very slow overall box office weekend that still offered up some surprises and great results for certain films. So it's the movie gods, Mike, as you always say. And you know, that's what we talk about on Ticket to Ride, the Comscore podcast, edited by Screendollars, Thaddeus Bouchard. And we really appreciate it, as always. Mike, as we wrap up here, I want to just say congratulations on the award. What is it again?
We are the
Innovator
Paper
of the
Airplane is the Lake Geneva Innovator of the Year. So, you know, hats off to the team over at our team at Paper Airplane, and a big thanks to everybody at the Lake Geneva Convention for acknowledging us this year.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. And so you are listening to a quote-unquote award-winning podcast, only because we're on it, and There's some awards in the mix.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Read the disclaimer.
I'm not sure this podcast is winning any awards. So
only in our hearts.
Only in our hearts. There you go.
All right, Mike. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you on the next Ticket to Ride podcast in about 2 weeks from now. So thank you, dear listeners, for listening, and we'll see you at the movies, right,
We'll
Mike?
talk later, guys. All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Bye, Mike.
She's got a ticket to ride, but she don't care.